All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today's session. I'm Vava here calling from Warsaw, and this is episode 4 of the Weeks to Hours Transformation series. Let's get started. So, there's a fictional town in Minnesota called Lake Wobegon, and it's from a radio show that ran in the US for 40 years. And the running joke of that show is that here's this little town where all the women are strong, all the men are good looking, and all the children are above average. That's the Lake Wobegon effect. We overestimate our own capabilities. Scott Brinker, the analyst of the MarTech landscape, coined an inversion of this phenomenon, and he called it the Inverse Lake Wobegon Effect. In marketing technology, we all think we're below average, and every marketer I talk to feels behind, mostly behind on AI. Even the teams doing remarkable work still feel like they're falling short. Why is that? And that's where Brinker introduced the concept called Martecs Law. According to this law, technology changes exponentially and organizations change logarithmically, which basically means fast versus slow, as you can see on this graph. So there's a gap that widens between the two over time. And here's the paradox. So this graph maps quite well to expectations versus practice. And that's precisely the inverse Lake Wobegon effect, which is applied here to marketing. Your expectations of what your stack should deliver are way ahead of what it actually delivers and where your organization stands on. So there's a gulf between those expectations and practice, and it gets wider and wider over time. And just as not all children in Wobegon, in Lake Wobegon, can be above average, not all marketers can be below average either. So if you feel like you're struggling to keep up, everyone feels the same. Just remember that. But the thing about AI is that it has changed the picture. And this is the new picture. There are new AI tools out there shipped every week, and the technology curve bent even more upward. So now the AI promises are getting repeated over and over by every vendor, by partners, by content creators. And those have inflated your expectations and everyone else's expectations even further. So you don't just feel behind. Now you feel behind relative to a future that hasn't arrived yet because I mean we are still in the early stages of AI. So Brinker says that the gap doesn't widen forever, and he has a theory that every so often an organization does needs to do a reset, which is a large jump up the technology curve, and it's essentially the answer to the question that could be asked at that point. If we were starting from scratch today, what would it look like? So it prompts that full organizational reset, and it's by nature quite disruptive. So resets like this can't happen often, but when they do, the gap closes quite violently. Or the reset doesn't happen and the gap doesn't close at all, and you continue over time in this widening gap. So what you do in the meantime is you buy one more tool because that feels responsible, right? You see that the market is raging ahead, and so you need to evolve as well. And the vendors are more than happy to sell you one more solution every time you feel like you're behind. But in my opinion, a reset is underway, not only because AI is such a fundamentally different technology from all the rest, but the data is also showing a trend here. So mid-market companies have started cutting their stacks by 16%, enterprises by 25%. And 61% of organizations cite cost as their top challenge, the top reason why they're even cutting their stacks. And Scott Brinker has advice here as well. So he says you need to ruthlessly prioritize and select the tools that are aligned with your strategy while the rest needs to go. So Don't add more, the advice says, only choose better. The problem is most teams don't have a framework for choosing, and that's what this session is about. So hi again, my name is Wawa Gilewski, and I'm co-founder at Protaigé, where we build a context-aware marketing production system. I've worked through two major MarTech shifts. One was when we went from legacy software to digital in the 2010s. Then, amidst of that, the digital to mobile shift happened. And now I can say I'm at the forefront of the third wave, which is the shift from digital to AI. So now all those digital transformation corporate initiatives are becoming AI transformation initiatives. But throughout all these shifts, I think the same pattern was visible. Organizations had impressive tool stacks, but these stacks still couldn't move campaigns from brief to live without spending weeks on revisions, reviews, and handoffs. So today's session is not a tool recommendation. If that's the reason you're here, you're not going to get that. I'm going to introduce a second axis that the industry's own map doesn't yet have. So you've probably seen this map already. It's the ChiefMartec Scott Brinker's supergraphic. It has 15K plus tools, 49 categories. So these categories are tasks. Every tool is organized by task. And they sit in these boxes that you can see on the slide. But what doesn't get a box is the space between them. And this map, you could say, has no y-axis. So there's no way to tell whether a tool carries meaning across your production lifecycle or starts from zero every time it's fired. So there are 15K plus tools organized by function, which is exactly why nobody noticed that it's incomplete. And for the record, I love the ChiefMartec market map. Considerable effort went into building it, and it's a great feat. But that incomplete picture has real consequences. And here's what researchers from UC Berkeley found. When they spent 8 months embedded in a 200-person company, they saw that 83% of workers said AI increased their workload. Now, a similar figure was found in a different study, and that study also saw that 96% of C-suite execs expect productivity gains from AI. So clearly a mismatch here. And so what happened, workers took on broader scope of work, invested more hours, put in more effort, had more tasks, often without being asked. And the result is that now 62% of junior and mid-level employees report burnout versus only 38% of leaders. So the people doing the actual work feel the intensity, whereas the people approving the AI tools and putting that extra pressure actually don't. The financial picture matches. 62% of organizations with 6 to 10 tools report unclear ROI. And when you're at 11 to 25 tools, that is nearly 90%. Most CMOs underestimate the true costs of their tool stacks by 40 to 60%. Integration, training, maintenance, you're paying 3 to 5 times the pricing page because of all of that. The tools are working, but it's the architecture between them that isn't. Every task level tool you add makes the workflow level problem worse. And the industry zone map can't show you why, because it doesn't have the axis for it. So we built a different map, and here it is. While we haven't mapped it out precisely to the 15K tools, you can assume it's pretty much the same tools, only in a different lens. On the x-axis, this is where functional domains sit, meaning what the tool does. So you have things like audience and strategy, content production, brand governance, etc. And on the y-axis, on the vertical axis, and this is what's actually new in this map, this is where context awareness sits. This means how much content intelligence the tool carries across your workflow. And we have divided it into three tiers. Tier one is tools that are point solutions that execute single tasks. They have no memory, they're great at what they're doing, but every time you start them, they start from zero. So think of examples like your AI writing tool, your Midjourney for image generation, Grammarly for fixing your typos, etc. They're brilliant at the task you give them to do, but they're unaware of what you mean, why you're doing this, what the next step in the process is, unaware of your brief, of your brand. Then you have tier two. These are more advanced because they're multitask and they are integrated with data. So think of Zapier, HubSpot, Hootsuite. These they have a sense of time. They know that, for example, a deliverable is due Thursday, but what they don't know is, again, what the brief said. You might have specified that content needs to follow conversational tone, and it's targeting mid-funnel CFOs. None of these tools are going to care. They just move data, they don't move the meaning. This naturally opens up the space for tier three. And tier three are context-aware workflow tools. Tools that carry things like brief intent, brand criteria. They know what the production state is, and they carry all of those things across the lifecycle. So they understand what you're trying to do and not that just some content out there exists. Tier 1 and 2 are packed with solutions, while Tier 3 is less populated with solutions. It's a new category. And to complicate matters even more, Tier 3 splits into two lanes. Because currently you have tools with which you can build the context awareness, the context-aware workflows. And you can do it yourself, of course, because it's fully customizable. There's a high ceiling for the capabilities, but there's also considerable effort. Or you can opt for a done-for-you platform, a purpose-built tool where context awareness is actually the product. So in this category, you define your brand, you write the brief, and the system carries all of that meaning through every stage of the content production lifecycle. And I wrote here on the slide that the question isn't whether tier 3 exists, it's how you get there. Because many of you have tier 2 tools wiring your stack together, and yet you're still feeling friction. So this map explains why, because those tools orchestrate tasks, not content. McKinsey says MarTech should be a strategic operating system. Forrester went further and created entirely new wave categories last year. So when analyst firms redraw boundaries, you know that the old ones weren't enough, that the market signals there's a change happening. If you want to start on your own, the market map is available on our website. Identify your own stack on both of these axes and see where your tools are sitting. If you've been following the series, we've been leading up to this map in a way. In episode 1, I talked how generic AI content, which is basically tier 1 content production tools, have no memory of your brand. Then in episode 2, Chrissy talked about how endless revisions happen because the brief isn't good enough and doesn't define what success criteria are. So basically, this creates a gap between the tools in your workflow. Then in episode 3, Michael described how context evaporates at every handoff, and he called it the workflow tax. He showed you in that episode the cost, and now in episode 4, this one, I'm showing you the cause of why this is even happening. So your tools sit in tiers 1 and 2, which are dense categories, and these tools are capable, but they're context blind. And so the workflow tax isn't a process failure because it's more of an architectural failure. And in episode 5, which is the next episode, you'll see how Ali will go in depth into the different lanes of that tier 3 and tell you a little bit more about the costs of building versus using. Now, if you want help going deeper into these issues, we are offering a content workflow diagnostic, again, which has become a tradition throughout all the episodes in the series. We walk your pipeline end to end. We can plot your tool stack on the map, show you where context is dropping. This is not a demo, it's a conversation about the business. So go check it out if you're interested. And now you have the second axis, you have the missing axis. So evaluate based on both of these axes. Don't just ask, what does a tool do? Ask, how much does it know? Where you have function coverage, but no coverage of the context. And that's where you'll find out that your value leaks. Here's the evidence. 72% of CMOs who cut vendors saw improved performance, up to 8 times faster campaign launches. One organization that went from 14 to just 6 tools saw 22% higher revenue per rep and over $200,000 savings. This isn't something new. This has happened before in software and in design. In software, there was extreme tool fragmentation, and it cost developers 6+ hours a week of productivity. So they decided to build internal platforms. And the result was that work was cut by 30 to 40%. The same thing happened in design. So you had Sketch, Adobe XD, InVision, and then suddenly Figma came out of nowhere and connected the full workflow and won. Adobe offered, I believe, $20 billion to buy it, which didn't go through, but still the market has decided. The market has chosen connected over individual tools. And I believe marketing is at that inflection point now. All right, so this is what I hear often and see online. Those arguments get repeated quite often. Platforms do everything badly, which is a fair argument, and it's earned by the old monolithic software suite model. But workflow first isn't that. Scott Brinker calls it composability. And he says, now you need to think in terms of interoperable components that are orchestrated by AI agents. Another argument is we're locked in. And yeah, I get it, this is real. But if you have an organization using a third of its stack, you're basically wasting millions a year. And CFOs are going to start this conversation whether you or your CMO is ready or not. And another objection I hear and see is integrations will improve. Better plumbing doesn't fix architecture. Your brief tool and your writing tool can have a perfect pipeline. The writing tool still won't know that the brief said that conversational tone for mid-funnel CFOs that I mentioned earlier. Right? So integration connects data, but context awareness carries the actual meaning. So again, here are the 2 paths to get to tier 3. You can either build it with a tool like Code, Crew AI, Diffy, Glean, and these are pretty capable tools where you can design an agent chain, you can define what context travels and what doesn't, you can wire stuff together, and you have to maintain it. You have to test it and maintain it. There's a lot of possibilities here, but it requires a lot of effort, and you need to get technical. You need the technical depth to get into these tools, understand them, and be able to use them, because they're essentially tools developed originally for developers, not for marketers. And then you have the use lane, which is basically purpose-built platforms where context awareness is the product. This is where Protaigé sits alongside other solutions, but it's not that crowded as a space. This is a very nascent early stage space. So in this category, the brief travels, the brand guidelines travel together with the content through every stage. What this results in is that the revision cycles are much shorter now. And what happens is no individual tool gets faster, but it's the AI element that causes context to stop from disappearing between these tools at every boundary between one tool and the other. Here's what changes. You stop being the connective tissue. Whether you built a solution or bought it, the system carries context now. So you can carry what matters most, which is the creative judgment. And you can devote your almost full and undivided attention just to that, because you're the human in this equation. So here's what you can do or start doing right after this webinar. 1, plot your stack on both of the axes. Where you have function but no context, that is where value leaks. So beware of those touch points. Number 2, pick one tool, analyze the boundary, and ask yourself, does the next tool in the workflow know what the other said, what the brief said? If someone needs to carry it in their head, that's a context gap. And then number 3, next time a tool crosses your desk, name the tier. Try to name the tier that the tool sits in. That one question changes the conversation from features to actual workflow coverage. So it's very, very valuable for your vendor negotiations. All right, remember the Lake Wobegon effect. Everybody thinks they're below average, everybody feels behind. And when you feel behind, buying one more tool feels like catching up. So now you have the second axis, and on that axis, almost everybody is in the same place. Tiers 1 and 2. I know you're there too, and you weren't making bad choices. You were just choosing in the only dimension that the market showed you. So you can now take the map, plot your stack, and the next time you buy a tool, ask the question the industry forgot: what does this tool actually know? Thank you. All right, I'm gonna take some questions now. We don't have much time because of that connectivity issue. I apologize for that again. All right. I'm on a small team, Anna asks. 6 people. We can just talk to each other. Does this framework matter for us, or is this an enterprise problem? At 6 people, the informal coordination still works. You can walk up to your buddy, your teammate, and just ask them something or shout over the room. And it's the advantage of small teams, really. Everybody loves that. But think about the moment when you're going to add a freelancer or an agency or even a new hire, the communication starts to get heavier. And still, even at 6, I would say when context moves between tools, ask yourself whether context travels with in that move. Does it help you, or does someone need to re-enter the context? Does someone ask, where is the latest version of XYZ, or what are the review criteria for this work? And someone needs to paste that in, and there's a lot of back and forth. Context awareness is something that is important regardless of team size, I would say. Okay, and let's take another question because we're already a little bit over time. So, okay, George here asking, if I take this market map to my CFO and say we need to invest in tier 3, what's my business case in one sentence? Oh, I love that question. All right, so I would say, okay, remember the stat that I mentioned, I believe it wasn't on the slide, but I said it out loud, that we're paying 3 to 5 times the sticker price of our current tool stacks, because context drops at every handoff, and you have integration costs, training costs, maintenance costs. So I would start your business case with that stat, and then continue with the 72% stat, which is 72% of CMOs who simplified their stack saw better performance. So I think this wraps the story quite well. And then you can take the market map and show it to the CFO as a visual reference and say, look, here's where we have coverage, here's where we don't, and here's why that gap costs us X. And so this is because we need to rework, we need to rebrief, and we miss deadlines, and so on and so on. I think CFOs will understand issues like this because they're used to evaluating complex architectural tools that need to move data and context between stages like ERP, CRMs, finance systems, and such. So yeah. All right. I don't have time to answer more questions. I apologize for my connectivity issue once again. And thank you so much for joining me today. I hope to see you next time during episode number 5, which is going to be presented by our CTO, Ali Shaheen. Stay tuned and see you next time. Bye.